Welcome into the newest edition of the Checkerboard Chat. We have plenty of Tennessee sports coverage to get to you today. Tennessee basketball team finishes their regular season strong with a win over Florida. The Tennessee women's basketball team got bounced in the semifinals at SEC tournament, and then the Tennessee baseball team had a strong week going 4-0 and sweeping Georgia State. We will start with the Tennessee basketball team. I'm Ryan Shumpert, joined as always in this segment by our Tennessee men's basketball beat writer, Jeffrey Russell. Jeffrey, Tennessee looks pretty shaky for most of the first half Sunday against Florida, but then rightens the ship and goes on to win 65-54 over the Gators. What were your takeaways from Tennessee's win?
So I think I had two big takeaways. Obviously, yeah, the first half was pretty shaky, but the one bright spot of that first half was the play of John Fulkerson. He had one big game a few weeks ago against South Carolina, but even that didn't really seem sustainable because he was just really getting fouled and going to the free throw line. He wasn't actually making shots. He really wasn't even getting close to putting the ball in the basket. But today or yesterday on Sunday, he was making moves. He was playing with a tenacity that you really hadn't seen from him all season. So that was nice to see in the first half. If you're the Tennessee coaches trying to get this team ready to go down the stretch, and then the second half, Tennessee was able to turn their defense into offense, which is something they haven't done in a long time. And when they were able to do it, they looked like they did at the beginning of the season, like they're one of the best teams in the nation. So I don't know if this is something that maybe kickstarted. Maybe the week off was really good for them, but they're starting to trend in the right direction if they're getting back to those sort of things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both those. Fulkerson things to, I mean, he was just way more aggressive than he's been. Really, he
Mm-hmm.
just was playing with more confidence, more aggression, and I mean, you've talked about it a lot on here. That the way he plays is so important that he can play with that aggression and confidence. But for me, yeah, it was the defense that stood out. At the last 24 minutes of the game, Florida scores just 21 points. Tennessee completely suffocates them on defense, and really, Tennessee's defense was good the first or 5 to 7 minutes of the game too. It was really just that middle 10 minutes of the second half the first half where Tennessee struggled on defense. And I think that's what has to be the encouraging thing. Obviously we talked a ton on here about Tennessee's inconsistencies this season. And for the most part, it seems to be they go is how they shoot. They didn't shoot well Sunday, just 3 of 21 from three, 27 to 62 from the field. Obviously not awful from the field, awful from 3-point line, not impressive. But the fact that Tennessee was able to, like you said, they looked like they did earlier in the season on defense. They were locked in on that side. They were able to turn it into offense, but they were really giving up no easy baskets, turned Florida over 16 times. So to me, how the week off, I'm sure, played a huge role in Tennessee's ability to do that. How consistently can they do that when they're playing games every single day or every other day, like they will be from here on out? To me, I think is the big question.
Yeah, I think one of the other maybe underlying factors or not factors, but underlying things that maybe won't get talked about as much from the game against Florida is you started to see Jaden and Keon really attack the basket again. They were driving, forcing their way into the lane and going up real strong. Whether they were making the shot or not or getting fouled, they weren't really afraid of contact. They were looking for it, trying to create opportunities around the rim, which they haven't for the past few weeks. So starting to see them get back into that was also something that kind of, I think, sparked the play that Tennessee had yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. I thought Keon Johnson, he ended up, I think, having 14 points, but got 4 of them real late. But I was almost surprised he didn't have more points halfway through the game. It was the best game I thought he'd played in a while. He was aggressive without taking bad shots on offense, and really was settling less for that mid-range jumper, and was doing a good job of getting to the basket. And look, he got to the basket and got a shot blocked a few times, but overall, I think it was still certainly more beneficial. And then the other thing, and this one I definitely don't think is going to be sustainable for Tennessee, but something that stood out was just the rebounding in the second half. Tennessee was able to really dominate the offensive glass. I think there was a possession pretty early in the second half when I think Florida was still up 4 or 5 points that Tennessee got 4 offensive rebounds and scored. And it seems like we've seen that happen plenty of times this year against Tennessee, and they haven't been able to use it in their advantage. But you looked at the way that Yves Pons rebounded yesterday, 8 rebounds. I think he had 6 or 7 there early and just in the first 5 minutes of the second half. And then Josiah Jordan James, we obviously know he's a really good rebounder. He had 10 yesterday. So that's the stuff that I think Tennessee needs from those guys. Now, I don't think it's going to come, in the same level that it did yesterday, but Tennessee can get Josiah James and East Pons to be attacking the glass, especially if you can add on the way Fulkerson played. I think that certainly changes the outlook for this team. Speaking of John Fulkerson, we talked about his performance yesterday being a good one. He tied Tennessee's lead with 14 points, did it on 6 to 10 shooting, 7 rebounds, and then 4 assists on 0 turnovers. That last two numbers really stood out to me, especially after Auburn game where he turned it over 5 times. What did you see from Fulkerson? What was he doing so well, and how sustainable is it? Do you think it was just maybe part of the emotions of a senior day that was clearly weighing on him pretty heavily?
He's like we've said, he started to play with tenacity and physicality again that he hasn't really played with all season. He wasn't really scared to attack the basket. You saw him go up for a big slam dunk attempt early in the first half. He missed, but it didn't really seem to affect him, and that's fine. I mean, you keep attacking the basket. If you miss those, okay, you're going to hit those eventually because they're just going to get out of your way. No one's going to want to get dunked on when 6'9" John Fulkerson's coming through the lane. So maybe it was the senior day, weighing on him. And if that is it, that's fine. If that was what it needed to take to get him going into gear, it's sustainable because we saw him play like that last season. We saw him do it, and he has more talent around him this year. So it's not like he's going to be the focal point of, what defenses are trying to stop. So yeah, it's sustainable. And if senior day is what it took to get him going, I think everybody will be okay with that.
Yeah, I think certainly he didn't play like this last year, so it's possible. Obviously, consistency is going to be the big thing. Can he do it consistently? That's the big word Rick Barnes says about just about anything. But I do agree. It doesn't really feel like the South Carolina game did when he scored 20 points. That game, he was getting a lot of easy putbacks. You mentioned the free throws, beating his man down the court for layups. He looked much more like he did last season on Sunday. The play that stood out to me was, I think this was playing pretty late in the first half. He got a long offensive rebound, and I don't even remember who the guard was, but he had a guard that was open that he could have kicked out to. And I mean, it was a play. There was not a thought in my head that he was going to try to score because he was 12 feet from the basket. And he faked the pass, spun baseline, and finished the reverse layup. And I think he got fouled on the play too. And that was like, whoa. I mean, we haven't seen that John Fulkerson at all this season. The confidence, the aggression. So, maybe he is into that mode. They can really channel that. And he was talking after the game. They'd had their best practices all year. They'd had leading up. So it is sustainable. It is possible, but I will remain a little bit skeptical until I see it for a couple straight games or a little bit more of it, I guess.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And I think anybody that, knows how this season has went will be right there along with you.
Yeah, certainly. I think anything this Tennessee team does well, you've had to wait and see if they could do it consistently because they really have struggled. Even the stuff they have done well, they've struggled to do it well consistently. So Tennessee now heads into the SEC tournament this next weekend in Nashville, Tennessee. The Vols, with the win over 40 yesterday, clinched the 4 seed, getting that all-important double bye. So it looks like Tennessee might have another rematch coming up with the Gators, as Florida is the 5 seed, and Tennessee will get the winner of the Florida game with either Vanderbilt or Texas A&M. What do you see as Tennessee's outlook in the SEC tournament? And yeah, what did you think of, I guess, the draw that Tennessee got?
I think it's the best thing you could have hoped for. I mean, the SEC tournament's going to be tough this year. There's a lot of good teams, a lot of explosive offenses. I think going in against a team that you just gained so much confidence against with that second half, because you don't like to look ahead, but most likely you're playing Florida. I don't see A&M or Vanderbilt getting past Florida. So having that just recent confidence with what you did in the second half against Florida, I think it means a lot. And I think if, another week off to get healthy, continue to practice, continue to work on things, I think they can get past Florida. And then you're looking at maybe above them in the top of the bracket for Alabama. I think it's Alabama will play Kentucky and Mississippi State, the winner of that. I think Kentucky gets past Mississippi State, and then whatever happens in the Kentucky-Alabama game happens. I think if you play Alabama again, they shot 50% from the field, the free throw line or the 3-point line the first time you played them. They made 10 3-pointers. I don't think they'll do that again. They'll stay hot, but I don't think they'll do that again. And if you play Kentucky, they're going to be tough. They have a lot of talent, but they still struggle to put it together at times. So there's definitely a path there that they can start, making a way to maybe Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, definitely. I think first you start and look at it, at least from how Tennessee matches up. I think you definitely Alabama, Arkansas, and LSU were the three teams that you're like Tennessee. They're going to be an uphill battle to win that game. So I think at first it was huge that they could get the 4 seed just because that meant they were going to have to play Florida or Missouri or Ole Miss on the Friday game. They wouldn't have to start with obviously if they would have lost, they would have to play a game Thursday. But on Friday they wouldn't have to play a team that you were looking at an uphill battle for. So I think that's the first thing that's real an encouraging sign. Obviously, Florida didn't have Trey Mann yesterday, one of their better players, but still, it should be a team Tennessee has confidence against after how they played against them on Sunday and the success they've had against them the past few years. And then moving forward, obviously Friday, you knew they were going to have to play someone really good no matter what that was. And I think it'll be interesting because I'm with you. I think Kentucky will probably beat Mississippi State. Kentucky's playing better, and they played Alabama really well about a month ago, kind of when Kentucky started to play better. I think that might have been maybe the game before Tennessee played them in Rupp and won. But they played a lot better in that game. I think they match up pretty well against Alabama, and they're playing well. So I think that's a trap game for Alabama. Not that I necessarily would pick Kentucky to win that, but and then on the other end, I think it's kind of weird to say because I do think Alabama is a better team than Arkansas. But the way Arkansas is playing right now and the way that Tennessee lost that first game to Alabama, I kind of think Tennessee matches up a little bit better against Alabama. Alabama obviously has the ability to shoot the three at a really high level. That was the difference in that first game. They made those 5 threes in the first 4 minutes of the second half on just about 6 possessions. I mean, it was crazy. And Alabama's capable of doing that. Don't get me wrong, but Alabama, for the most part this season, is leaning more on its defense than it has its offense. So I think that's a game that Tennessee could muck up a little bit, play physical, because Alabama doesn't rebound the ball very well either, which is another reason I think Tennessee matches up well in that game. And it's not a game I'd pick Tennessee to win, but I do think it plays pretty well for Tennessee, especially with the way that first game went down. I think you'd see a more motivated Tennessee team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely paths to victory for whoever you're playing. I think they've seen Kentucky. If they have to play Kentucky again, they've seen them twice at this point. They know what they're going to expect, and I think maybe you have a more motivated John Fulkerson, a more healthy Yves Pons. You can kind of have a more solidified post presence against Olivier Sarr and the rest of the Kentucky team.
Yeah, definitely would be certainly be an interesting third game between Tennessee and Kentucky. We've already seen the Vols and Wildcats meet twice in the SEC tournament since Rick Barnes has been at Tennessee. So the potential for a third game, and certainly what would be a very high pressure game, as Kentucky is hoping to make a run this week to make the NCAA tournament, and Tennessee looking to get things back rolling in the right way heading into the NCAA tournament. The Vols will start their SEC tournament action on Friday at ESPN. They'll play in the second game slot 25 minutes after the Alabama, Kentucky / Mississippi State game in. So probably looking at a 2:30, 2:45 tip. It'll be pretty flexible all weekend for Tennessee and Nashville. And so we're sitting here on Monday, and Tennessee has, let's say, made it to Sunday at SEC tournament, won the SEC tournament, had a successful SEC tournament. How were they able to do it?
They locked in on defense, man. I think offense is what it is at this point, but when they're locked in on defense, no one can really touch them outside of maybe, if they had to play Baylor or Gonzaga or something like that. But I don't think anybody in the SEC can really play with them when they're locked in on defense. And Florida's a good team who's kind of turned it on lately. And, Tennessee kind of shut them down in that second half. I think if they're make it into Sunday and, they win, I think you probably saw John Fulkerson continue his success from this week, and they locked in on defense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's going to be the key for Tennessee the rest of the way. They kind of are what they are on offense, but they got to control defense. They got to control what they can control and what they can do at a high clip. So completely agree. It, to me, seems really unlikely that Tennessee would have 3 straight good shooting games, to win the SEC tournament. Maybe that is possible, but it doesn't seem like Tennessee's put together more than 2 in a row all season. And even then, they haven't done that many times. So I agree with that. And then I would pivot and say the rebounding, I think, is the huge thing. Defense and rebounding. Too many games this year. They've been good at on the defensive end, but they don't get don't finish possessions out with rebounds, and it really kills them because you look at Tennessee isn't a team that has a ton of depth. So it's hard to come out and play really good defense night in and after night out when you're leaning on the same guys. And it gets even harder when you got to play 20 more seconds of defense after you've played 25 really good seconds of defense. So I think those are two big things, and I'm really with you on the. I don't know if it necessarily just has to be John Fulkerson, but whether it's John Fulkerson or East Pons or Olivier Camois, someone for Tennessee has to play good on the interior, be consistent throughout the week, and Tennessee can't be having to figure out what they're doing inside game by game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a path to get there. They have the team, they have the talent. It's just, Rick Barnes' word, consistency. So we'll see.
Yeah, certainly should be interesting and should be a challenging weekend for Tennessee, but certainly one that where the bracket sets up the opportunity as well, not just staring at what could be an easy one game and out, which it looked like it could potentially be, depending on how the bracket fell and how Tennessee did Sunday against Florida. But we will have complete coverage from Tennessee's SEC tournament weekend in Nashville, and then we will go straight from that. This complete coverage of the NCAA tournament bracket as that should come out next Sunday, and we should be on the podcast for you guys on Monday, breaking down Tennessee's SEC tournament and what they're seeding, what their bracket looks like in the NCAA tournament in Indianapolis. I was about to say we don't have a city to point it to, but we do have a city to point it to this year with everything in Indianapolis. So it should be interesting. Looks like the Vols are about a 6 seed right now. Could probably stay in that or play their way back to a 7 seed with how they do in Nashville this weekend, but should certainly be interesting, and we will have everything you need at utdailybeacon.com. We will be back in segment number 2 to talk a little bit of Tennessee Lady Vols basketball. Thanks, guys. Welcome back to the second segment of this Checkerboard Chat. I'm joined now by the assistant sports editor here at the Daily Beacon and UT Lady Vols beat writer Josh Lane. Josh, it was a up and down week for the Lady Vols in Greenville. They get a quarterfinal win over Ole Miss and come from behind fashion and then fall to South Carolina in the semifinal game. Just what were your takeaways from the weekend in Greenville?
Yeah, well, to start, all those things we talked about last week, about starting fast, about limiting turnovers, playing smart, all those things, they didn't do basically any of them. And Ole Miss was weak enough. Renia Davis had a career game, so they kind of made up for it against Ole Miss. It was a slow start for them, but Davis dropped 33 points, so they made up for that. They bounced back, but did the same thing again the next game against South Carolina. And South Carolina was way too good for Tennessee to do that. And we saw what happened because of that. South Carolina went on to win the SEC tournament. So, these problems continue to exist for Tennessee. They're going to have a week to look at them. But, if anything, it kind of brought to light the problems. And really, with the March Madness and everything coming up, I think maybe they realize just how big of an issue it is against South Carolina, because if they're going to make a deep postseason run, then they're going to have to play some really good teams, and that these issues that we've been talking about for a while are definitely going to be something that they're going to have to address. But I think overall, kind of looking at the broad perspective of the SEC tournament, I think you can still take away that it's been a successful season for Tennessee, because they were projected to finish 6th in the SEC. They came in 3rd. They got the double bye. They won a game in the tournament. So I think all in all, it was a successful season, regular season. But I think you saw some problems get highlighted in the SEC tournament, and hopefully they're going to address them moving forward.
Yeah, I think certainly good point on kind of showing how much of a success the season was overall. I think it was the first time in 5 or 6 years Tennessee had made the semifinal of the SEC tournament, which is a crazy stat. Shows how far the program had fallen. But yeah, no, I mean, credit to you. You talked about it last week. The slow starts, it's been a problem. They can maybe get away with it against, in the first game. They can't get away with it against better teams. And that's exactly what happened both those games. I mean, why do you think the slow starts keep on being a problem? And what has Coach Harper said about it? I mean, how do you explain it?
Yeah, I wish I had a really good answer about that, but to be honest, I don't know, man, because I think looking at especially South Carolina, their defense was very good about that, about limiting the production inside in the paint. That's where Tennessee has thrived all year. So they did that, but their defense also shut down Renia Davis and Ray Burrell For just like the second time all year, neither of them scored in double figures, and the first time was, they were resting all their starters in like kind of an easy game. So, in your first real competitive game of the season where Davis and Burrell, don't score double figures, I think, that's a big reason why the slow start. But there was that, the turnovers were really bad in the first quarter again. Tennessee got into a lot of foul trouble there in the first half of the first quarter. And so, they're bringing out some of their starters because Kittle and Key got 4 fouls early, and you have to bring in some of your bench that's not been productive at all this year. So, it's kind of all those reasons I think have led to the slow start, but it's frustrating because we've been talking about it for so long, and you think they that's something obviously that they realize, but they, whether they addressed it or not, it hasn't really improved at all over the course of the last couple of weeks.
Maybe this is just oversimplifying it, so I want to get your thoughts on it. But it almost feels like when you get in the tournament play, this team is so reliant on Davis and so reliant on Burrell that it feels like you get good play from one of them, they could win a game, maybe two. If they don't get good play, they could get upset in the first round or second round. And if they get both of them playing good for a week, 2 weeks at a time, they could make a deep run to the Elite Eight or potentially even the Final Four.
Oh, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Davis and Burrell have been well over half of the team scoring this year. They're so reliant on those two, and if they get hot at the right time, as you said, they can probably make a deep run. I think the rest of their team is good enough to kind of account for whatever other flaws, how minimal they are if Davis and Burrell are going so well. But if they don't, I mean, we saw it against South Carolina. If they can stop, if they can stop both of them, then there's no chance for Tennessee. But it comes down to those two. It's happened all year, and going forward, the success is going to go through Davis and Burrell. So
How big of an issue, Tennessee hasn't been getting a whole lot of production from their bench. How big of an issue now that they're playing games on one day's rest or short rest is it that they get more out of their bench?
yeah, it's gonna be very important for the Lady Vols going forward. Especially if teams can stop Renai Davis and Ray Burrell like South Carolina did, or Tennessee continues to get foul trouble. And Tamara Key and Cassie Kushkittle are coming out, and you got to bring in Emily Saunders or Jordan Horston or whoever it is off the bench. Those players haven't been producing all year. I guess Jordan Horston has really been primarily like the sixth man off the bench, so to speak, and her numbers have not been great. She had a nice game. She did leave the team, but it was with 11 points against South Carolina. So, put that into perspective. But it's the lack of scoring depth has been kind of an issue all year. And, we talk about how important Davis and Burrell are. And so other teams in the tournament can, look at this South Carolina game and see that, oh, this is going to be an issue for the Lady Vols if we can shut down, this duo of Davis and Burrell. Their scoring depth is not going to step up and help carry the load. And so this is definitely going to be a big issue for Kelly Harper and for the bench to address. They got a week and a half or so hopefully they will. But yeah, big issue for them.
Yeah, you mentioned the week and a half off. They'll have a week off until they know their seeding in the tournament next Monday. What in this week off, besides just getting fresh legs, resting everybody, if you're Kelly Harper, is the most important thing to focus on?
All right. Well, there's certainly no shortage of issues they could work on. The scoring depth we've mentioned, this slow starts to games they've had. They haven't really had a lack of energy lately. It's just kind of the execution of their game plan, so they could work on that. Turnovers have been an issue all year, but honestly, I don't think they're gonna fix that. It looks like they're just gonna have to sit around 15 turnovers per game and try to make up for that. So for me, I guess the biggest one would be the foul trouble, because the last two games it was pretty egregious with the amount of fouls that Tennessee was getting in. Some of the calls I think might have been a little generous in going the other way, but that's just something that they have to work with. So looking at cleaning up fouls, particularly with Tamari Key, Cassie Kushkitawa, some of those players up in the post that Tennessee's been so reliant on. I think that might be the biggest issue, the biggest thing they need to look at for this week.
Certainly should be interesting as Tennessee gets ready to advance into NCAA tournament play. They'll figure out their seeding and their bracket next Monday. We'll have complete coverage of that, getting you ready for the Lady Vols NCAA tournament. Now we'll pivot over to Segment 3, we're going to talk a little bit of Tennessee baseball on the way out. Josh also covers the baseball team for us here at the Beacon. Good weekend for Tennessee's baseball team. They sweep a 3-game series against Georgia State, winning 6-1, 5-1, and 7-0. Josh, what were your biggest takeaways from Tennessee baseball's weekend?
Yeah, this weekend, going into it, pitching was going to be a big question mark for Tennessee because, not only has Jackson Leaf been out, of his last start with that hamstring injury, but Chad Dallas got scratched on Friday for soreness or whatever the case was. So pitching, this particularly starting pitching, was going to be a big issue for that. But so we saw some big performances this week. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that later, so I won't go too much right now. But pitching, that was I think a big relief for Tony Vitello to see some of the performance he got, but also offensive wise on the hitting perspective, I think they had a really nice weekend, a weekend that that they really needed at this time, because kind of, I want to say they've been struggling as a whole because they've still been scoring runs, but several players have been kind of lacking, so to speak. And I think, they kind of broke out when they needed it, because this was not a bad Georgia State team at all. They've had some pretty nice wins this year. Tennessee faced a couple of good pitchers, and, Ryan Watson and then Treadway yesterday, and kind of hit him around for a bunch of runs. So, you look at Jake Rucker, Max Ferguson had a couple of good games. Liam Spence has really been turning it up lately. So a couple of those guys there have really had a nice offensive weekend right when they needed it the most.
Yeah, I think the pitching was definitely the biggest takeaway I had. You're down two of your best guys in Chad Dallas and Jackson Leaf, and Jackson Leaf, it sounds like they're going to be down for a long while, if not the whole season. But to not skip a beat, only give up 2 runs on the weekend. Blade Tidwell looked the best he has so far in 3 starts. Will Heflin, who's basically only ever pitched in a bullpen role at Tennessee besides a few midweek starts, was fantastic starting on Friday, giving up 1 run in 7 innings. And I think more than anything, what kind of blew me away with the pitching was those guys in the bullpen that are the staples, Sean Hunley, Redmond Walsh. Tennessee didn't really lean on them all that much. Sean Hunley threw 1 inning on Saturday. Redmond Walsh got to save on Saturday, throwing 2 scoreless innings. But there was a lot of the other guys that they leaned on, and I think that certainly bodes well for Tennessee going forward. But we mentioned Chad Dallas. Obviously, I think it's going to be a lock to be in that weekend spot when he comes back and gets fully healthy. I don't think his injury is too serious, but Jackson Leaf does seem to be pretty serious, and Tennessee has kind of bounced around and tried a lot of different guys at that Sunday starter spot. Elijah Pleasance for a few weeks. Leaf had that start, and then Mark McLaughlin got to start this weekend through 3 2/3 innings. Just what have you seen from Tennessee there, and how do you think that possibly develops as they get into SEC play?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that because, yesterday, as you mentioned, McLaughlin and Elijah Pleasance followed it up, and Pleasance has had 2 really nice outings in a row. So, he could be definitely a candidate to start, but also McLaughlin's had a couple of nice starts too. So I figure, Vitello might go with either one of those guys to start, because I think they're a little different in arm angle and pitch types and stuff. So it's a good difference for hitters to see. So you might see, Pleasant start and then McLaughlin come in right after, or vice versa, like what happened yesterday. But definitely with the performances they got with their really good outings, shutting out Georgia State, very, very good for Tony Vitello to see, because, as you mentioned, Tennessee is having a little bit of depth issues with their starting pitching right now on the weekends.
Yeah, certainly agree with all of that. I think as good as Pleasance has been in his last 2 appearances out of the bullpen, I think it would be hard to see them moving him back to that role. Not that it's impossible, but more than anything, I think you saw this week how much they wanted to keep Hundley in the bullpen. It seemed everything to align for Sean Hundley to at least get 1 start or get a start after, you felt like that was a possibility with Leaf going down, and then even more so when Dallas went down. But for them not to do that, for them to keep him in the bullpen, I think shows that they want to look at all their other options there. And Mark McLaughlin's not a guy who's thrown a ton of innings, period. So it'll be interesting to see how he does in SEC play. Another guy that we haven't seen a whole lot of, I'm curious about, is Jason Rackers. Vitello mentioned him preseason as being a guy that could be a weekend starter. We've only really seen him in 1 appearance. He's still not completely 100% back, I think, from that Tommy Johns he had a season ago. But another guy that would be interesting to see if he develops into a long inning option.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I believe Racker started against Arkansas Pine Bluff the other week and had a good outing, so he's definitely an option. as you said, coming off injury, so that'll be something to watch. But Tennessee, they had every option to start Sean Huntley on Saturday, as you mentioned, or on Sunday, with this open rotation spot, and they didn't. So I think you're absolutely right about that. They really love Sean Huntley out of the bullpen. He was well rested too, so only throwing an inning. So he definitely could have made that start, but they love what he brings out of the bullpen. Him, Redmond, Walsh, really nice couple of arms there on the bullpen. So, as you said, Tennessee is they're going to see what else they can get from these guys that that are their rotation options before, having to turn to someone like Sean Huntley to start.
Tennessee will head back on the road in the midweek, going to Charlotte to take on a pretty solid Charlotte squad as a former Vol Austin Knight, who's on the team the past 2 years. So, Vitello Mission kind of reuniting with him. And then Tennessee will be back in Knoxville this weekend when they take on a UNC Greensboro team. It's off to a real nice 9-2 start. So should be interesting. We'll have complete coverage of both games this week at utdailybeacon.com. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Checkerboard Chat. Have a great rest of your week.